It's a sensation that sidesteps your thinking brain entirely. A signal, fired into the primitive part of your mind, that still remembers what it is to be prey. Behind your ATV, gaining ground in the subterranean dark, is the source of that signal. An anomaly in motion. 7 feet tall, armor-plated in interlocking rust-colored scales. Its face is a long snout packed with teeth, and its eyes. Those eyes have vertical pupils that track your every move with cold, calculating intelligence. You are miles beneath the earth, in a place that does not officially exist on any map, and you are being hunted. So how does a weekend ride through the Missouri countryside spiral into a desperate flight for survival, from a nightmare that should not be real? To understand the anomaly that pursued Pat Garrett through the darkness, we have to go back. Back to the moment before anything was wrong. To a day that began in absolute, boring normality. On paper, the date is simple enough. March 7th, 2004. Pat Garrett, an experienced ATV rider, and his friend Michael unload their vehicles at the entrance to a facility in Carthage, Missouri. On the documents, on the signs, it's known simply as the Underground. That name is an understatement, almost a joke. This is not a cave, it is a subterranean city. 43 million square feet of limestone, carved out by miners, an artificial void so vast, it slips past easy comprehension. Picture nearly 750 football fields laid out side by side, then sealed deep within the earth, where sunlight has never existed. The public section is mundane, almost disappointingly so. A sterilized, climate-controlled world of self-storage units and leased business space, all humming under fluorescent lights. On the surface, it's just another piece of industrial infrastructure. But this is not where Pat rides. He's a subcontractor, one of the few who knows the facility's deeper secrets. Its unlit, undeveloped sections, where the maps thin out and the rules start to feel loose. He and Michael soon leave the pavement behind, their headlights cutting into a different world. Down here, the air cools and thickens. The only sounds are the hum of their engines and the crunch of tires on gravel. Massive limestone pillars, each the size of a building, march away into the blackness, holding up the weight of the world above. It is a place of profound, manufactured silence. Not natural, but imposed. This was Pat's sanctuary. He was at ease here, confident in the geography of this man-made abyss. That confidence, that quiet sense of ownership over the dark, is what pushed him into a simple, almost thoughtless choice. He spots a tunnel fork he hasn't explored in a while, and he slows, motioning for Michael to follow. To him, it's just another path, another corridor to be added to his mental blueprint of the deep. A casual turn that will carry him past the known boundaries of his world, and straight toward a warning he was never meant to see. And there it was, the warning Pat Garrett was never meant to see. Deep in the undeveloped section, caught in the twin beams of their ATVs, hung a sign. Not rotted wood, not some drunk's spray-painted dare. This was a professionally fabricated aluminum plate, drilled and bolted into the rock. The letters were crisp, institutional, and so out of place in this forgotten corner of the earth that it felt like a glitch in the scene. It read in clean black print, Naval Authoritative Zone. For a moment, Pat just stared. An experienced contractor like him knew what that meant. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a declaration of ownership by a power that does not get questioned. Some old animal part of his brain, the part that survives by recognizing predators, pulled into a cold knot and told him to turn around. He paused, knuckles whitening on the handlebars. But then the explorer in him surfaced, the man who prided himself on knowing every inch of this place. A slow, confident smirk spread across his face. Michael rolled up beside him, his engine idling with a nervous hum. He lifted his headlamp toward the sign. "Pat? I don't know, man. Navy? Way out here." Pat laughed, and the sound rattled down the narrow tunnel, echoing back thinner, like it didn't belong. "Relax, it's probably just some old Cold War nonsense, forgotten for 50 years. Come on." He snapped the throttle, revving his engine, and didn't wait for a reply. He drove past the sign, crossing an invisible line. Michael, after a heartbeat of hesitation, followed. They plunged deeper into the darkness, convinced they were just driving farther into a tunnel. They had no way of knowing that the threshold they'd just crossed wasn't merely a line on a map. It was a tear in the fabric of their reality. At first, that tear in the fabric of their reality looked harmless. It simply looked like a dead end. They drove on for another few hundred yards, the tunnel walls pressing in, until the passage terminated abruptly in a solid face of limestone. Michael let out a breath of relief. "See, it's nothing. Let's go back." Pat didn't answer. He swung off his ATV, the engine's low rumble dying into a heavy quiet. He'd ridden these tunnels 100 times, maybe more, and honestly, this felt wrong. It was too clean, too geometrically perfect for a natural dead end. He walked toward the wall, boots crunching on the gravel floor. There was an almost imperceptible distortion in the air in front of it, an optical ripple like heat haze rising from summer asphalt. He reached out a hand, fully expecting to feel the cold, rough texture of the rock. Instead, his fingers met no resistance. His hand, then his wrist, then his entire forearm vanished into the wall. There was no sensation, no cold, no pressure, not even a tingle. Just nothingness. He yanked his arm back, staring at it as if to confirm it was still attached to his body. His mind, usually so adept at navigating this subterranean world, was now completely unmoored. What he was seeing, and what he had just felt, refused to match. A projection? A hologram? The level of technology required for an illusion this flawless, this unexplained, miles beneath the Earth's surface, was beyond comprehension. And then the image of the sign flashed in his mind. Naval Authoritative Zone. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was a deliberate, manufactured deception. He turned to Michael, whose face had become a pale mask of terror and disbelief. "We're going through," Pat said at last, his voice a mix of deep-seated fear and a dangerous, overriding curiosity. For a long, silent heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then they fired up their ATVs and accelerated into the shimmering illusion, plunging into the anomaly in the rock, like a submersible slipping through an unseen layer in the deep. For a split second, their world dissolved into a cascade of light. Then they emerged. The change was absolute. The air was now bitingly, unnaturally cold. So cold they could see their breath plume in front of them in thick, white clouds. The smooth, machine-cut walls were gone, replaced by cruder, more ancient-looking stonework that felt utterly alien. And the silence. The silence was different here. It was heavier. This was not the silence of an empty place. It was the silence of something waiting. They had breached the perimeter. But what, precisely, had been waiting for them all this time? In this cold, ancient darkness? The answer didn't arrive as a sound in the dark. It surfaced as a pattern. Silent, deliberate markings etched into the cavern floor. Ahead of them, the tunnel was laced with complex geometric designs. These weren't crude scratches. The lines ran too straight. The intersections fell at angles that were almost clinically exact, hinting at a form of mathematics, or a language that didn't feel remotely human. Pat eased his ATV down to a crawl, the engine's low hum the only intrusion on a heavy, suffocating silence. Michael kept close behind, his unease a physical presence in the frigid air. The temperature had dropped so far now that their breath hung in front of them, ghosting through the headlight beams in pale, fleeting clouds. Further along the passage, their lights caught something in a deep alcove carved into the rock. Two figures, tall, slender, perfectly still. Pat's first assumption was statues, some bizarre, forgotten installation left by whatever intelligence had carved this place. They stood at an estimated 7 feet tall, their proportions elongated, their posture almost elegant in a way that felt fundamentally wrong. Curiosity, fatal, stubbornly human, pulled them closer. You know that impulse that makes you step forward, when every instinct says, turn back. They swung a leg off each ATV, left the engines idling as a low thrum behind them, and advanced on foot. With every step, the statue idea started to collapse. The surface of the figures wasn't stone. It had texture, an organic quality that seemed to drink in the light rather than throw it back. There was a density to them, something coiled and waiting inside that motionless exterior. Pat was a few yards away when it happened. An anomalous movement. Not a shift of balance, but a slow, deliberate rotation of the head from the taller figure. Its neck appeared to lengthen as it turned, vertebrae, or whatever passed for them, moving with an impossible smoothness until its gaze locked onto them. In that moment of absolute, airless stillness, the realization hit with the weight of a physical impact. These were not statues. They were alive. And in that instant, Pat and Michael stopped being explorers. They were prey. The thought hadn't even finished forming before a sound obliterated it. A raw, guttural scream tore out of Michael's throat, a sound that skipped words altogether and went straight into the animal brain. It was the pure, distilled terror of a creature that knows its death is imminent. Pat did not decide what to do. His hands were already wrenching the throttle, the ATV jerking forward, its engine screaming in protest. They fled. The tunnel, once a place of quiet discovery, narrowed into a suffocating corridor of panic. The roar of their engines filled the space, but it could not drown the noise behind them. There it was, a rhythmic, heavy footfall, impossibly fast. Pat risked a glance over his shoulder, and he saw it. The 7-foot creature was already in full pursuit, moving with a terrifying, liquid grace. It was not running so much as flowing through the darkness, its powerful legs eating up the distance with an unnatural velocity. In the brief, flickering wash of his taillight, the details seared themselves into his memory. The skin was a dull, rust red, armored in thick, overlapping scales that rippled over a grotesquely defined musculature. Its face narrowed into a long, predatory snout lined with teeth, and its eyes held a cold, reptilian intelligence. Vertical slit pupils, the eyes of a hunter, locked directly onto them. Then the taller creature raised its arm. Something sat in its hand, not a firearm, but a dark, geometric device. It began to emit a high-frequency whine that bored straight into Pat's skull. A brief pulse of light, and then a dull, metallic thud as some kind of projectile slammed into Michael's ATV just behind him. Instantly, the engine died. It did not cough or sputter. It was simply gone. As Michael's vehicle rolled over one of the glowing symbols on the floor, every system on it went dark. Honestly, it was like watching a circuit get cut. Without a word, he bailed, hurling himself off the dead machine and onto the back of Pat's ATV in a desperate, clumsy scramble. The extra weight made the engine strain, their escape slowing just enough to feel fatal. They sped on, neither of them daring to look back for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Pat slammed on the brakes, the ATV skidding to a halt about 100 yards farther down the tunnel. They turned. The creature stood perfectly still, balanced at the edge of the geometric symbol its weapon had driven them across. It did not advance. It made no attempt to follow. It simply watched them, head slightly tilted, as if regarding a specimen that had slipped out of its enclosure. This thing was not failing to catch them. It could not, or perhaps would not, cross that line. A wave of dizzy relief crashed over Pat. For a heartbeat, the anomaly was contained. But the feeling lasted only a fraction of a second, because a new thought slid in. Colder, heavier, far more terrible. This thing was being held here. This was not a lair. It was a cage. And they had been on the inside. That single thought, cage, was all his body needed. No more analysis, no more contemplation, only the frantic animal urge to flee. The ATV's engine screamed through the limestone corridors, a desperate mechanical shriek swallowed by the immense darkness behind them. The tunnel walls blurred past, damp and pale, like the inside of some buried throat. Then they burst out of the tunnel mouth and into the open, gasping in the cool March air of the surface world. The blessed, familiar gray sky loomed overhead. Traffic far in the distance. Wind. Clouds. They were out. Heart hammering against his ribs, Pat fumbled for his phone with shaking fingers. He punched in 911, his voice cracking as he tried to report the impossible. A chase, a monster, a restricted zone deep within a public facility. He tried to compress terror, geography, and whatever that thing was into a few broken sentences. You know how that goes. The words never come out right. He waited for sirens, for rapid-fire questions, for any sign of alarm. Instead, the voice on the other end was unnervingly placid, a monotone drone that absorbed his panic without the slightest ripple. No disbelief, no urgency, just a sterile intake of information. After a brief pause, the dispatcher stated flatly, "Underground security will handle it." Then, a click. The line was dead. For a single moment, Pat Garrett believed that reaching the surface meant survival. That if he was no longer in the cage, he was no longer prey. This was a profound miscalculation. The call he had just made did not summon an emergency response. It activated a containment protocol. The creature had been the immediate threat. The system that housed it was the existential one, and its cleanup crew was already moving. As they reached the desolate upper parking lot, two black SUVs with no plates and no markings seemed to materialize from the gray, boxing them in with quiet precision. Men in tactical gear stepped out, all in black uniforms with no insignia, their movements unnervingly synchronized. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They simply flowed into positions of control, like pieces in a drill they'd rehearsed 100 times. One of them, clearly the leader, approached Pat. His face was a mask of professional indifference, eyes giving away nothing. "You have 9 minutes to be off this property," the man said, his voice as flat and colorless as the concrete around them. "You will not speak of what you saw. You will not return." Pat, trembling with a mixture of fear and rage, gestured back toward the tunnels. "My friend's ATV. It was disabled back there. We have to—" The man didn't even look at him. He simply raised his wrist, glancing at his watch as if checking the time between meetings. "The United States Navy will press charges if you are found on this property again. That vehicle is no longer your concern." Pat stared, speechless. The injustice was a physical pressure in his chest, a weight that made it hard to breathe. His property, his rights, his very reality, all dismissed with a flick of the wrist. He was nothing here, a loose end to be tidied up. He was forced to abandon the wrecked ATV, a piece of evidence, a piece of his life, to the darkness below. They had won. The system had closed ranks around its secret. They took his property, threatened him with federal charges, and ensured his friend would be too terrified to ever speak again. They would even erase the record of his 911 call, rendering him a madman in the eyes of the law. Let's be real. They hadn't just shut him down. They had taken everything. But they made one mistake. They left him with the story. They had left him with only one thing: the story. But a story is a fragile thing, and especially one never meant to be spoken aloud. In the days that followed, though the record doesn't tell us exactly how many, the silence from his friend Michael was absolute. The terror that had welded them together in the dark now stood between them like a wall. The event had been so profoundly violating that Michael's mind sealed it away, refusing to grant it the dignity of words. Pat was alone with his memory. He tried to anchor his experience to something official, something that left ink on paper. He placed another call to the Jasper County Sheriff's Department, seeking an update, seeking a report, seeking any formal acknowledgement of his 911 call from the edge of oblivion. The response he received was colder and more terrifying than any subterranean passage. A dispassionate voice on the other end of the line informed him that there was no record of his call, no dispatch, no log, no event. According to the official record, it simply never happened. The system had not just threatened him, it had erased him. He was now a ghost in his own life, haunted by a truth no one would acknowledge. It's in this state of total isolation that a person reaches a final dividing line. Surrender to the silence, or commit one last act of defiance. Pat chose defiance. He did not go quietly. So he turned to the only outlet that could not be easily controlled: the nascent digital expanse of the internet. He meticulously documented every detail of the encounter, from the Naval Authoritative Zone sign to the holographic wall, from the primal wave of dread to the horrifying visage of the creature in his ATV's headlights. He cast his testimony into the void, a message in a bottle hurled into a dark sea of data, not knowing if it would be met with ridicule or belief. It was met with both. Of course it was. But buried in the noise, it caught the attention of a researcher named Mary Sutherland. She was one of the few who saw not just a fantastic tale, but a pattern, an anomaly repeating in the dark. To her, Pat offered the one piece of evidence he had left, the single immutable data point from that day. It was not a photograph, not a recording, but a simple string of characters. The vehicle identification number of the ATV he was forced to abandon. A machine's ghost, lost forever in the deep. Pat Garrett's life was irrevocably fractured. He had ventured too far, seen something not meant for human eyes, and collided with the machinery that keeps our reality neatly contained. What do you believe happened in those tunnels? A stress-induced hallucination, or a genuine encounter with a truth the world is not ready for? If you find value in examining these unsettling records of the unexplained, subscribe and activate notifications. The archives are deep, and there are more stories that resist being forgotten.